Tech and talent, AI's impact on athlete performance. We're just getting one more chair for the stage here. So I'll do my stand-up act. No, I won't. But now that we're all set, I would love to introduce our panelists. We have Masa Kabayama, the co-founder and CEO of Uplift Labs, Brian Moore, co-founder and CEO of Orreco, and Ndamukong Suh, engineer, entrepreneur, Super Bowl champion, three-time All-Pro, I believe, as well. Welcome. As before, get your questions in early and often, and I'll try to work them in throughout. My saying names and titles is hardly proper justice as an introduction, so I'll give each of you a minute or two to talk about your company and relevant experience. Awesome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Masa, co-founder and CEO of Uplift. So at Uplift, we embarked to bring sports science, sports medicine, and everything that a lot of people in this room do into a democratized form to really move from the professional athletes to the everyday athlete. And the way we go about this is we built our own proprietary technology, which is an AI software platform we call our Movement Intelligence platform, that has lab-grade accuracy of 3D capture, and then providing the data analysis to optimize performance while minimizing injuries, just using iPhones and iPads.
Awesome. Very cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Moore. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Orreco. We're a sports and data science company. We look after teams in the NBA, NFL, Premier League, NWSL, WSL, NBA. Pretty much wherever there's high performance, we're there. We're obsessed with it. And we're from, the company was founded in Ireland, so OR is the Irish for gold, and RECO is short for recovery. So it sounds like Oracle, if you're wondering how to pronounce it, which is very handy when you're starting off. You go, it's the CEO of Oracle. Certainly, I'll put you straight through. And then, wait, isn't that Larry Ellison? But it helps you to get in the door. But then we've got three kind of main pillars of our business. One is biomarkers. So we work with athletes to help them understand how they're responding to training, because everyone in this room would respond differently to different stimulus, even the lights, the temperature. We use biomarkers. We have a women's platform because women have been egregiously overlooked by science and medicine since time immemorial. That's important. And it's half the planet, which is ridiculous. And finally, we have a movement behavior platform that helps pick up early signs of injury. So similar concept to Masa, but on the elite side, where we're using the in-stadium cameras.
Ndamukong Suh, probably most notably known for playing 13 plus years in the NFL. I've been very fortunate throughout my career to experience lots of great tech companies, especially in the sports industry. Aura and Hyperice. Recently sold some companies to Hyperice and been a board member and advisor for several tech companies in the sports industry and more.
Mm-hmm. And in that playing career, how much did you lean on data and technology, and what benefit do you feel like you gained?
A lot. I think back in 2010 when I started, which is ages ago, it was kind of archaic. But overall, to where we're at now in 2025, there's been a transformation of a lot of different things that have been afforded to us. And I think as athletes, we find different nuances and ways to find ways to get that 1% or 0.5% to take us to the next level. And so I was always going into the lab. I was fortunate enough to have an amazing performance director I still work with till this day. And then I got the great lab in campus of Nike, where I got to sit there underneath Phil Knight's beautiful campus and everything that he has out there to work in. Now, innovation back then was Mia Hamm building, but now it's LeBron James building. So in there every summer, finding new ways to tweak and learn different nuances that can advance my playing career.
And so for Brian and Masa, what new AI-powered features have you added to your company's offerings recently? Obviously, we've seen this major explosion in the capabilities. Maybe start with you, Brian.
Sure. I think the last 2 years have just accelerated massively, but it's all built on a decade of having the right data and have it organized in a way to be able to plug into the new systems and take advantage of the LLMs or your machine learning. So a couple of really quick examples. We've got like an AI drill planner. Look, the maths behind this is amazing. I definitely would have paid more attention in school. I was looking out the window, but we've got a drill planner that can predict a training session to within 5 yards of distance and within 1 acceleration. We've got engines that can give nutritional suggestions at different phases of the menstrual cycle. We've got like knowledge engines for teams because, you know, when key staff leave, sometimes institutional knowledge can just go away. And then finally, the big one is motion, where you can see an injury between 1 to 15 minutes before it's happening, like a hamstring or an ACL, which is, as a sports scientist, how you get burnt at the stake. But when I put the concept out there, we got a really positive response because it just makes intuitive sense.
Yeah, I feel like you need to elaborate on that one, because that's such a big point. How do you do that?
Well, I think with evidence, I think you have to, like the game, as like Sue was saying, that the data has exploded, and we're all watching games that have completely changed. Like, how much faster is the game now, or, you know, toward the end of your career, at the start of the career?
I would say it's tremendously faster, not only just because of all the different nuances of being able to find ways from shoes to apparels and all the different things that go into that, but they're just building us bigger and faster. God is, at least in parents. And so when we look at those different particular pieces, it's finding ways to advance that and using those tools. And I think tools are key to have, but we also have to have that human interaction as well. It's very important. That's why I mentioned Keith D'Amelio, who's my performance director, and how have that human interaction of being able to say, I can look and feel and see the things that you're doing, and I can teach you about the data, because I'm so focused on my craft and what I'm trying to do and accomplish and be the most dominant. But at the same time, I also need to learn those different new aspects of these new data points that are coming out. And some of them may not be relevant to me, and that's okay. But how do we decipher which ones are the best ones for me and which ones are going to, or are not going to be the best ones for me?
Exactly.
So suppose Keith had an AI algorithm that said, hey, you're at a severe risk for, let's say, a hamstring tear in the next 10 minutes, but it's the fourth quarter of a close game. How do you respond?
In the fourth quarter of the game, 1, I'm not coming out.
Yep.
2, I'm not taking any data points at the particular point in time, and I am full throttle of trying to win it. Unless we're obviously up by multiple points and multiple touchdowns, and then I'm usually out and just hanging out and enjoying myself. But I think those different particular pieces are looked at more for at least from the NFL perspective, and how our operations work throughout the week is during that week time frame, and how do we look at it from a perspective of, especially on my older age of things and being in the game, I would go half days on Wednesdays, full throttle on Thursdays, and then be off on Fridays, preparing for the next game on Sunday and or Monday. So those are when the tools really come into play. When it's game day, I'm not looking at any data points.
Yeah. And it's, you know, with that in mind, it's the game that we're watching is faster, so there's more accelerations. Therefore, there's more decelerations. Therefore, there's more eccentric load, inflammation. That changes how you move. That drives your risk. So everything around this should be geared to get the player onto the field or the court in the best possible shape, and then everything after that is to recover. So you don't want to interfere with the game. You just want to use data to support your decision making.
And one thing I would say is that somebody who has chronic issues, that's when that implementation can be key. Because you're looking at the consistency and are they primed, and did you see a pattern where they had this before? And those are where data points come into play. So finding patterns and recognitions that can say, all right, we may want to relax and do something a little bit different on this particular day or leading up into the game. Those are when the data points come into very acute situations to where it's like somebody's having a major injury.
Yeah, like that return to play scenario. My favorite story with wearables and tech was Nate Burleson at the end of his career was trying to play one more year with the Cleveland Browns. And he said that he had a hamstring injury, so he was trying to like make his way back, and he was on a very strict play load, but he in practice. But he said he was doing so well that when his coach tapped him and said, "Hey, your catapult GPS says you've hit your maximum load, you should be done." He's like, "No." He told me, he's like, "I've been beating these DBs all day. I'm fine." Literally on the very next pass route he ran, retore his hamstring. And then he was like, and he got cut by the Browns as a result of the injury. And he was so frustrated by the whole situation, it led him into retirement. I mean, obviously it doesn't usually work that precisely, but.
But knowing Nate personally, that was a blessing in disguise. He's got an amazing career where he's at right now.
Yes, absolutely. You know, it worked out very well for him. The only reason I knew that story is because of his TV days and so forth. But I digress. Yeah.
Love to go back a little bit to your original question, but tie in, what Sue had shared in his story. So we actually got started about 7 years ago, and the landscape around AI and the buzz is very different, obviously, from today. And how many of us would have wished we invested in Nvidia back then than maybe now? But speaking of Nvidia, there's so much, obviously, and deservedly, buzz going on with Gen AI. It is no doubt transformative. But looking back 7 years ago, we actually made a big bet to go into computer vision, machine learning, and how do we put that in the application in a commercial setting? And what's okay, so just talk about that part. So fast forward to today, we actually work with 65 organizations. Some of them are in this room, so thank you, including a number of MLB teams, NBA teams, the league, MLB league as well, USA Track and Field, and others. So we're really trying to build a sports lab on your iPhone, iPad, so it's portable wherever the action is happening to be able to assess injury monitoring, for example, on the field or on the court. But going back to Nvidia, it's interesting. Anybody who caught the earnings report this quarter, they're actually, guess what the number one line item is in terms of their R&D investment quarter over quarter? It's computer vision. It's 280% quarter over quarter, the number one line item. And so this is kind of interesting to think because, yes, Waymo, for those who are in the Bay Area, for example, I mean, you're seeing that everywhere. You're seeing more Teslas. They've dropped LiDAR. They've dropped radar, now going straight solely into computer vision. So there's that demand. But I would believe that computer vision would also be just as proliferation of that is going to be as ubiquitous as Gen AI is starting to be. And so how do the two cross and meet with one another? Just very quickly, I think there's sort of three base layers, or three layers there is. There's sort of the data capture layer, which I think many of you are doing. And this is how we're also helping to assist leagues where with data capture, you can capture the athlete data. We saw that also with AWS and the NFL. The next kind of layer is intelligence layer. And so this is very interesting. This is where Gen AI comes into place. And so you can have an actual, let's say in our case, like automated reports that can flag it's very hard for the coach to not be able to see in their naked eye. Just as an example, we have something, because we work a lot in baseball with MLB teams, something called forearm flyout detection. And here, you can actually see if a player is like 20%, 20 times of their pitches, 65% if they have forearm flyout, which is causing a lot of stress depending on their form, that might tear the UCL to lead to Tommy John surgery. So we definitely want the coach to be able to see that flag. And then finally, you have the application layer. So going back to what you said, Sue, it's so important that human-computer interaction, the human interface is right and understandable, digestible, not just for the coach, but certainly for the athlete.
Well, it has
and that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a great point of being digestible. And I think when it comes to coaches and it comes to athletes, they're so built in and focused on the way things have been done. So when you're adding new aspects into their life and their livelihood of how they're organizing, you have to make it digestible. And then you also have to have people that are willing to be open to it at the same time. I think a lot of coaches, especially in the NFL, are not open to these different particular pieces. But this is where sports science comes into play. This is where these organizations and these cohorts within the organization can start to spread their wings and make it that much more better, because also these analytics go into business and go into making these business decisions of saying, all right, Mason Crosby, why am I giving him 3 for $106 million today? Because he's shown to me that he can last through a season, play, and analytics have proved that. And so I've got not only the physical, tangible things that I see with him, the intangibles of him, the player and how he affects the locker room, but also I have the analytics and data points that can prove that. So I've checked all 3 boxes for that example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And sort of building off the idea of like the human interface and making it digestible, like how does like a good AI analysis, how do these reports, what's the best way to put it into the workflow so that the coach feels empowered, the athlete receives it? Like, what have you found, what strategies have you found work?
So I like this quote from Scott Galloway, who's an NYU marketing professor not too far from here, also a podcast guru. But he basically says, it's not so much that AI is going to replace people, but it'll replace people who don't use AI. And one of the most tactical kind of examples that I've recently come across is the work that our CTO is doing and a lot of our engineering team is doing, which is sort of really IDE, integrated development environments. So there's, for example, a software tool called Cursor that works alongside these LLM models like ChatGPT, Anthropic, and it's not as much checking your programming on the fly, but it's actually almost like a pair program, on the side. It's an assist. And so what I'm very curious, and I think this is going to be, 2025 is going to be a banner year for this, because oftentimes we hear with a lot of the clients we work with that their front office staff, they might be understaffed, they don't have the resources. But now if you think of the pair programming concept, and we talk about agentic technology as well, like you have an agent or assistant, I think this is going to be the big year where we're going to start to see that. And that's really exciting, especially for those who have traditionally struggled with resource allocation or trying to get those extra resources.
Yeah, and right now we use the similar technologies to interrogate the databases, and you can pick GPT 4.5, you can pick Claude, wherever you want to do Gemini, and surface an insight, but you get a different answer from each one. It's almost 3 different coaches, which again is part of the exploration. But I think where this is all headed to is more like Bradley Cooper in Limitless, where it takes the pill and it just surfaces the information in the right context, the right time. So the hamstring you mentioned, the next morning, the physician shouldn't have to go in and find out that information. It should be sitting there like hamstring, yes or no. Then the knowledge engine pulls up the latest papers, the last week's training, sleep, hydration, and then the rehab plan, and then a resource for the athlete. That's the direction I think I can see. We can see everything headed and ask those questions, because in elite sport, there's no margin for error. You need to have an evidence behind what you're suggesting.
Do you believe that generative AI has, you mentioned that there are 3 different answers if you ask 3 different models. Like, how do you work to, build a large language model that's going to surface information that is relevant and is in this coaching philosophy? I mean, I assume that takes a major investment.
Yeah, it really does, and it's also understanding the sporting landscape, because I think there's amazing knowledge bases within teams, like structured and unstructured data, but it's got to be curated. So, and the last thing you want to do is you can't put athlete data into one of those systems, so you have to have your own system that you can ping off an LLM to surface an insight. So that's important. To Masa's point on the computer vision, like we're seeing signal like 85% sensitivity, 86% specificity before a hamstring or an ACL. So you're not running onto the pitch like Sue said, but you're watching constantly. In a couple of years' time, I can see you getting to that point where you've got a bank of data that's gone back 5-6 years, and you build out those models. But it's more useful to guide the training. Like a coach, so all the athletes, Sue is wired to overreach, they're wired to push. You've got Keith there to guide you. And that's where I think it's having that human in the loop with the models, then I think that's you're heading in the right direction.
So the audience question came in for you. From an athlete's perspective, in the current media and fan-obsessed data stats consumption environment, how much shared biometric data is too much? And do you feel like you've always been aligned with the NFLPA as to the best way to disseminate that?
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, how much data is too much data provided to the public audience? I think it's a fine balance, because you want the fans to be interactive and be in the know of everything that's going on. Obviously, that plays into betting and all the different things that go in from that aspect, but also you have to understand those things can be detrimental to the players as well, especially from a standpoint of next contract negotiation and the different aspects that go into it. But also, as a professional, I'm looking for weaknesses in my opponents. So I'm also looking for understanding that, seeing that information. So you have to have that balance of saying, I can give a little bit to keep the game alive and people engaged, but also at the same time, I can't give a competitive edge and be detrimental to the person whose information is being released as well, which technically they own.
What data are you the most sensitive that you wouldn't want, for example, to get out? Just as an example, I remember like when Whoop was sponsoring some PGA athletes, they didn't want their heart rate data necessarily in the beginning to be advertised.
Yeah, I think the most important thing.
To be on air. So.
Yeah. I think for me personally, if I'm looking at things, and I always look at I'm always skewed towards the negotiation side of things. Ultimately, competitors, you're smart enough, if you study enough, you're going to find people's weaknesses. But when it comes to functional movement and the imbalances and ailments for folks, those are the different things that they'll knock you on that, and then especially from a contract perspective. So I would say more of the functional movement side of pieces, that area is very, very sensitive, which is a jump in simplicity. That's jump testing and things of that nature, broad jumps, some of those different particular pieces, which they carry a lot of weight.
Yep.
And sort of to that point, like when it comes to data ownership and permissions, who did you let see data like that? And then, for the two of you, how do you build it into your system to make sure that those permissions are enabled?
For me, data points, permission-wise, was always a strength and conditioning staff. And then we also, most of the teams I played for, I think for maybe outside of one, it was a performance staff there. But then I mandated everything was housed in, not only from their perspective, but especially with Keith, my performance director. And then obviously I kept my own files as well, just as a backup from that standpoint, because in the off season especially, that's where I was able to digest all of that information, unless it was something that was acute that I needed to know in season, because I could trust, after being 5, 10, 15 years with Keith, that he's gonna change my program accordingly, and these are the reasons why we have our Monday morning, Tuesday morning calls, depending on the game. This is why I'm changing it, because of these data points and then going from that standpoint. But it's a fine balance, because I mean your information is technically available to almost every NFL team, or it was at one particular point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's critical, because like what Sue's described there, you're curating a digital asset that's going to be immensely valuable in time. Probably we haven't figured out how that's going to be, and I think there's a great precedent for this, like Sports Data Labs with the Cleveland Clinic and FIFPro now have a service where the athlete data can be housed in one place, and ultimately there'll be a marketplace, and I think athletes will be, should be paid on their data as it's ingested into the models, because like Sue's an outlier amongst outliers. They're really, like, athletes, an amazingly talented bunch of people. There's very rich data around them, a lot of contextual data that you need for the models to work. My data, not so much. Maybe my mom's interested in it, but very few other people. So I think that's why athletes are in a really unique position. It's so important that they're protected and that the data is theirs.
Yeah, and with a lot of European clients, you also have a lot of GDPR.
Absolutely,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we definitely believe that the athletes should have ownership of their own data. Maybe I can also inject something a little different from the perspective of software companies that work alongside and collaborate with leagues, maybe in 2 examples. So, one, we've been very fortunate to work with MLB League over 3 seasons for the draft combine. And ultimately, I think it's, the obvious thing is what value we're helping to provide or what problem we're helping to solve. And in their case, they're using our 2 iPhone Uplift capture system to, basically capture the kinematic information for hitting in swings that's provided to all the 30 teams. So what we, as a software company, we don't really have the identified per person data, and nor will we ever leverage that or market that. The only way is we use the anonymized data, so then some of the athletes that come through, if they wish, they can see where they stack rank and compare to some of the others that have come through, if they wish, and they're able to get that data. So I think there are ways that you can get and develop sort of a win-win-win scenario. So the athlete retains the data, they're happy, but the teams and the scouts, they get what they're looking for. And then, ultimately, as a tech provider, we are always wants to constantly understand that loop so we can provide further value down the chain.
Yeah, and it's about layering that data and it's empowering the athlete with that information. And again, not to confuse them or like annoy them. It's literally, it sits in the background. Like we've done a lot of work with Newcastle United in the Premier League, and they've been really pushing it on, and it's just a risk model that sits alongside all the other very clever stuff they do with Dr. Paul Caddison and James Bunce. So it's with the performance and medical staff, you're just supporting them. It's just another layer for decision making. We don't get too excited about what we're doing. They're doing the really, really hard bit, and the coaches are under a lot of pressure. They've got to make decisions, and often it's their livelihood or their job is on the line. So you've got to give information it's like inspired by the Backstreet Boys, like tell me why. You're telling me to do this. Tell me why. So.
And when it comes to, you mentioned the coaches being under a lot of pressure. Sometimes they get fired. Sometimes, they're successful enough that they get hired away to another role. So there's a lot of turnover. Is there a way of using large language models to bake in some institutional knowledge so that when there is a turnover, it's not all lost out the door?
Definitely, I think like we were doing really interesting stuff with like, the vector mappings and the embeddings to capture the coach, because again, it is a coach's voice that often gets lost because it's not necessarily numbers, and that contextual information is really important. The coaches are under a lot of pressure. I got fired, like properly fired, like fired, just before the Athens Olympics by a coach who, because the data was showing me and us that the players were, or the athletes were very, very close. They were massively overreached because they were working so hard to get there. And I opened the email. I thought I'd done a great job, but it was one of those, you should have kept the email. Nobody in the history of the world has done more damage to an Olympic effort than you. And that's where like I met the biostatisticians, Professor Newell, and the cognitive computing team, and they say, listen, we need to understand this information, we need to organize it in a way that ultimately this is all going to come, and we're going to have these type of models. This is like 20 years ago. So we've been kind of building this for a very long time, and it's immensely powerful for the folks that are organized, but they're under huge pressure. Unfortunately, when the event happened, what I suggested was going to happen, happened, and they came back and said, okay, show us what you were seeing. But it's a high stress situation. There's a lot on the line, and under pressure you can revert to type, so which is understandable. And if you got to where you got to by working extremely hard, guess what, you're going to do more of it. And sometimes it's right at that moment that when you need to back off. Sometimes you need to keep pushing, but if you have data and you ask the right questions, you can find that sweet spot.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a continuous and even more interesting shift in the symbiotic model between the coaches and this really treasure trove of historic data for all the players that have existed. And then if you do have turnover, on the coach's side, like how do you really harness years and years of athletes' institutionalized data? And this is where, a key example of how LLM models can really make that efficient, across a number of different, athletes, longitudinal, improvements, gains, injury history. I mean, all of that is now like literally available for diagnosis.
And I mean, you were sort of ahead of your time, but it seems like now in vogue, the idea of having an athlete data passport, so when you change teams, you don't lose it. I mean, having someone like that, you probably must have had teammates that suddenly had to start completely from scratch each year, right? I mean, you had...
there's a lot of teammates that, till this day, that have no desire in even having the information, and let alone even know that it's readily available for them. So I think this is where technology can come in hand, where it's saying these are the things that are afforded to you, these are ways that can be broken down and be advantageous for you at the end of the day, but they still have to want to. I think that's the big thing, is that how can I use it, and I have to be the proponent to want to push forward to use this data.
And I think it's a really brilliant point. Like you have to meet the athletes where they're at. And so we're a big bunch of nerds. So we're like, we love like loads of paper, and there we go, they're like, whatever. But when we learned with the amazing team, the NBC, the Comcast NBC Accelerator and Boomtown, they were talking about how people engage with language, and you've got like Ak from CamAI, like 15% of the planet speak English, and that we assume everybody. So if you're in a different language, one, and then two, how readily will you engage with that content, and this using video, using voice, that's all where it's all headed to, because you have to meet the person where they're at.
A question just came in from the audience. Do you train separate large language models for each sport you support, or do you find benefit in combining athlete data across sports?
That's a really good question. I think there's what we're finding is there's really strong signals in the data. They're amplified from sport to sport, but they're pretty much consistent, because physiology is physiology in terms of adaptation to loading. But then there's definitely sport-specific pieces. So, example, basketball used to be 24 seconds, as an example. On the shot clock, used to be 8 up, 8 set, 8 score. Now it's 8 up, launch a 3, get the rebound, or go back. So the game has changed, and that's why training has changed. And equally, we would say, has warm-up changed? You can see very consistent warm-ups through the years, but the game changed, but did the warm-up?
Yeah, the game has changed tremendously from where it is. And you talked about basketball, talk about football. We're thinking 3.5, 4 seconds. We're talking about sometimes 1.5, 1.8, 2.0. Like I'd love to be back at 4 seconds. I'd have 150 sacks.
Did you sometimes get mad at, let's say, Tom Brady for scoring too quickly?
Yes and no, because I'd like my rest, but also at the same time, I mean, if you're putting up points, that means we're chasing after the quarterback, and so we're having a lot of fun from that standpoint. But it is one of those things that you find that fine balance, and I think playing with Tom and playing against him, it's a love-hate relationship when he scores fast.
Awesome. Well, we are unfortunately wrapping up on a time here. So round of applause for Masa, Brian, and Sue.
Thank you very much.